On a remote stretch of Highway 29 in Northern California, a heartbreaking scene had been unfolding for 3 days straight. A tiny German Shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, sat by the roadside crying desperately every time a vehicle approached. Hundreds of cars had passed by, their drivers assuming the puppy would eventually wander away or that someone else would handle the situation. But the little dog never moved from his spot, and his cries only grew more desperate with each passing hour. When 34-year-old veterinarian Dr. Sarah Chin finally slammed on her brakes and ran to investigate, what she discovered would not only save the puppy's life but reveal a story of loyalty so profound that it would restore her faith in the unbreakable bonds that exist in the animal kingdom. Get ready for a tale that proves sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and that true dedication knows no age, size, or species. Dr. Sarah Chin was running late for her shift at the Napa Valley Animal Hospital when she first heard the crying that would change everything. Driving north on Highway 29 toward St. Helena, she had been mentally preparing for a busy Friday filled with routine checkups and vaccinations. At 34, Sarah had been a veterinarian for 8 years, and she thought she had seen every heartbreaking animal situation imaginable. But nothing had prepared her for the sound that pierced through her car's closed windows and the hum of the air conditioning. It was a cry so desperate, so filled with anguish, that it made her heart physically ache. She slowed her Honda Civic and scanned the roadside, expecting to see an injured animal that needed immediate attention. Instead, she spotted a tiny German Shepherd puppy sitting perfectly still on the gravel shoulder about 50 yards ahead. The puppy couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, with the distinctive large ears and gangly proportions of a young German Shepherd. His coat was a beautiful black and tan, though dulled by dust and what appeared to be several days of outdoor exposure. As Sarah's car approached, the puppy's behavior became even more heartbreaking. He lifted his small head toward the oncoming vehicle and released a series of desperate, high-pitched cries that seemed to plead for help. But when Sarah slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet past him, the crying stopped abruptly. Sarah parked her car and walked back toward the puppy, her veterinary training immediately assessing his condition. He appeared alert and physically uninjured, but his eyes held a depth of sadness that seemed impossible for such a young animal. What struck her most was his positioning. He wasn't wandering aimlessly or trying to approach the road. He was sitting in a specific spot as if he was supposed to be there. "Hey there, little guy," Sarah said softly, approaching slowly with her hands visible. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The puppy's response surprised her. Instead of running toward her for help or cowering in fear, he remained exactly where he was but began crying again. Not at Sarah but toward the road as if he was calling for something or someone specific. Sarah knelt about 10 feet away, observing the puppy's behavior with growing concern. In her years of practice, she had seen animals exhibit strange behaviors due to trauma, illness, or injury, but this was different. The puppy seemed to be performing a specific task, as if he had a job to do that required him to stay in that exact location. As she watched, another car approached from the north. The moment the vehicle came into view, the puppy began crying again with the same desperate intensity she had heard from her own car. The driver, a middle-aged man in a pickup truck, slowed down briefly, looked at the puppy but then continued on his way. "You've been doing this for a while, haven't you?" Sarah asked, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. "How long have you been sitting here, baby?" The puppy's coat and the worn patch of ground beneath him suggested he had been in that spot for at least a few days. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her clinic to inform them she would be delayed, then settled in to observe the puppy's pattern more carefully. Over the next 30 minutes, 6 more vehicles passed by. Each time the same behavior, desperate crying as the car approached, then silence once it passed. The puppy never moved from his position, never tried to chase the cars or run into the road. He simply sat and cried as if he was sending a message that only he understood. Sarah's veterinary instincts told her that the puppy was healthy enough to have survived several days outdoors, but her heart told her that whatever was driving this behavior was more complex than simple abandonment or being lost. The deliberate nature of his actions, the specific location, and the consistent pattern all suggested that this little German Shepherd was waiting for something or someone. As the sun began to set over the Napa Valley, casting long shadows across the highway, Sarah realized she couldn't leave him there for another night. But she also sensed that moving him might interrupt something important. Something that her veterinary training hadn't prepared her to understand. Sarah spent the next hour documenting the puppy's behavior, and what she discovered was both fascinating and heartbreaking. The young German Shepherd had developed a precise routine that suggested intelligence far beyond his 8 weeks of age. He would rest quietly between vehicles, but the moment he heard an approaching engine, he would position himself facing the road and begin his desperate calls. What struck Sarah as particularly unusual was the puppy's selectivity. When a large delivery truck rumbled past, his cries were perfunctory, almost obligatory. But when smaller vehicles approached, particularly sedans and SUVs, his calls became more urgent and sustained. It was as if he was searching for a specific type of vehicle, or perhaps a specific vehicle entirely. "You're looking for someone, aren't you?" Sarah said softly as she moved closer to the puppy. "Someone who drives a particular car." To test her theory, Sarah walked to her Honda Civic and started the engine. The moment the puppy heard the familiar sound of her car, his behavior changed dramatically. He began crying with renewed intensity, his small voice carrying a note of hope that hadn't been present with the other vehicles. Sarah turned off the engine and approached the puppy again, this time carrying a small bowl of water from her emergency veterinary kit. The puppy accepted the water gratefully, confirming that he had been there long enough to become dehydrated, but he never left his chosen spot to drink. As darkness fell, Sarah faced a difficult decision. Her veterinary ethics demanded that she rescue the puppy from potential danger, but her growing understanding of his behavior suggested that removing him might prevent a reunion that he desperately needed. She decided to call her colleague and friend, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, who worked with the county's animal control services and had experience with unusual animal behavior cases. "Marcus, I need your opinion on something strange," Sarah said when he answered her call. "I've got a German Shepherd puppy who's been sitting by Highway 29 for at least 3 days, crying at passing cars. But it's not random, he seems to be looking for something specific." Dr. Rodriguez, who had 20 years of experience in animal behavior and rescue situations, was intrigued by Sarah's description. "Young animals can develop fixation behaviors after trauma," he explained. "If he was separated from his family in a vehicle accident or during transport, he might be trying to recreate the last situation where he felt safe." The theory made sense, but Sarah's observation suggested something more complex. "Marcus, he's not just crying randomly. He has preferences for certain types of vehicles, and he's maintaining a specific position. This feels more like he's performing a learned behavior." Dr. Rodriguez agreed to drive out to Highway 29 to observe the puppy firsthand. While Sarah waited for his arrival, she noticed something that added another piece to the puzzle. The puppy's positioning wasn't arbitrary. He was sitting at the edge of what appeared to be a small dirt access road that branched off from the highway. When Dr. Rodriguez arrived in his animal control vehicle, the puppy's reaction was immediate and telling. He began crying with even greater intensity than he had shown for Sarah's car, and for the first time since she had been observing him, he stood up and took several steps toward the approaching vehicle. "Interesting," Dr. Rodriguez observed as he parked and approached the scene. "He's responding to official vehicles differently than civilian cars. Sarah, I think this puppy might be trained." The implications of Dr. Rodriguez's assessment changed everything. If the puppy was trained, it meant he wasn't simply lost or abandoned. He was following instructions or responding to conditioning that someone had deliberately taught him. But who trains an 8-week-old puppy to sit by a highway and cry at cars? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to form her own theories. Dr. Rodriguez examined the puppy more closely, checking for any identifying marks or signs of recent medical care. "Sarah, look at his paws," he said, pointing to the puppy's feet. "These aren't the paws of a dog who's been wandering for days. They're clean, recently trimmed, and show no signs of extensive walking." The discovery that the puppy had been cared for recently meant that someone knew where he was and possibly why he was there. But it also raised new questions about why a healthy, well-cared-for puppy would be stationed beside a busy highway, crying at passing vehicles. As they prepared to make their next move, both veterinarians realized they were dealing with a situation that went far beyond a simple rescue. Dr. Rodriguez's observation about the puppy's recently groomed paws led to a systematic search of the immediate area. Using flashlights, Sarah and Marcus explored the dirt access road where the puppy had been positioned, looking for any clues that might explain his presence there. About 30 yards down the access road, they discovered a small campsite that had clearly been occupied recently. A tarp shelter was stretched between 2 oak trees, and the remains of a carefully built fire pit showed signs of use within the past few days. Most importantly, they found several empty cans of puppy food and a collapsible water bowl that matched the puppy's obvious state of recent care. "Someone's been taking care of him here," Sarah observed, examining the campsite more closely. "But why would they set up camp so close to the highway and leave the puppy alone?" Dr. Rodriguez found additional evidence that painted a clearer picture of the situation. Tire tracks near the campsite showed that a vehicle had been parked there recently, and the pattern of the tread suggested a truck or large SUV. More significantly, they discovered a handwritten note tucked under a rock near the fire pit. The note, written in careful block letters, read, "Stay here, buddy. Wait for the blue car. Daddy will come back for you." Sarah felt her heart break as she read the words aloud. The puppy wasn't lost or abandoned. He was following the last instructions he had been given by someone who clearly loved him. The blue car reference explained his selective responses to different vehicles and his particular excitement when her blue Honda Civic had approached. "We need to contact local authorities," Dr. Rodriguez said, photographing the note and the campsite with his phone. "This looks like someone left the puppy here intentionally, probably in an emergency situation." Sarah knelt beside the German Shepherd puppy, who had followed them to the campsite and was now exploring the familiar area with obvious recognition. "What happened to your daddy, little guy? And why hasn't he come back for you?" Their investigation took on new urgency when Dr. Rodriguez discovered something that changed the entire context of the situation. Hidden beneath the tarp shelter was a small duffel bag containing men's clothing, a military ID card, and medical documents that told a story none of them had expected. The ID card belonged to Staff Sergeant David Chin, no relation to Sarah, a 28-year-old Army veteran who had recently been discharged from active duty. The medical documents revealed that David suffered from severe PTSD and had been participating in a service dog training program designed to help veterans cope with their conditions. "Sarah, this puppy isn't just a pet," Dr. Rodriguez said, studying the documents more carefully. "According to these papers, he's a service dog in training, specifically being prepared to help David manage his PTSD symptoms." The revelation explained the puppy's unusual behavior and training. Service dogs, even those in early training, were taught to respond to specific commands and situations. The puppy's vigil by the highway wasn't random behavior. It was a trained response to the last command he had received from David. But the discovery of David's belongings at the abandoned campsite raised new and troubling questions. Why would a veteran leave his service dog puppy alone with instructions to wait for a blue car? And where was David now? Sarah's phone rang, interrupting their investigation. The caller ID showed her veterinary clinic, and she answered to find her receptionist with urgent news. "Dr. Chin, I just received a call from Napa Valley Hospital," her receptionist explained. "They have a patient who was brought in 3 days ago after a serious car accident. He's been unconscious since arrival, but he keeps calling for someone named Buddy whenever he shows signs of consciousness. The hospital staff thought you might know something about it since you're the local veterinarian." The timing of the accident matched perfectly with when the puppy had begun his vigil by the highway. Sarah looked down at the German Shepherd puppy, who was now sitting attentively at her feet as if he understood that the conversation concerned him. "Marcus, I think we just found David Chin," Sarah said. "And I think this little guy has been waiting for his daddy to come home, just like he was told to do. But getting the puppy reunited with David would require navigating hospital regulations, military bureaucracy, and the complex medical situation of a veteran W. The drive to Napa Valley Hospital took only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours as Sarah held the German Shepherd puppy in her lap while Dr. Rodriguez drove. The puppy, who they now knew was named Buddy, seemed to sense that something important was happening. His previous crying had been replaced by alert watchfulness, as if he understood they were finally going to find his daddy. At the hospital, Sarah and Marcus faced the first of many bureaucratic challenges. Hospital policy strictly prohibited animals in patient areas, and the night supervisor was initially unwilling to make any exceptions, even after they explained the situation. "I understand your concern for the veteran," Nurse Patricia Williams explained, "but we have protocols about animals in the hospital. The risk of infection and contamination is too high." Dr. Rodriguez, who had dealt with similar situations in his animal control work, suggested a compromise. "What if we brought the puppy to the hospital parking lot where David could see him through a window? If David is responsive to hearing Buddy's voice, seeing him might help with his recovery." Sarah added her professional weight to the argument. "As a veterinarian, I can guarantee that Buddy is healthy and poses no medical risk. More importantly, service dogs are specifically trained to provide therapeutic benefits to their handlers. Separating them during a medical crisis could actually harm David's recovery." After consulting with the attending physician, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the hospital staff agreed to allow a controlled reunion in a private room, with strict medical protocols in place. Dr. Martinez, who had been treating David since his arrival, was particularly interested in any intervention that might help her patient. "David has been in and out of consciousness for 3 days. Dr. Martinez explained as she led them through the hospital corridors. When he is conscious, he shows severe agitation and repeatedly calls for Buddy. His PTSD symptoms seem to be complicating his physical recovery from the accident. David's room was in the trauma recovery ward, and the sight of him connected to multiple monitoring devices was sobering. At 28, he appeared much younger, his face pale and drawn from his injuries. According to his chart, he had suffered a concussion, broken ribs, and internal injuries when his truck had rolled off Highway 29 during what appeared to be a PTSD episode. The accident happened about 2 miles from where you found the puppy, Dr. Martinez continued. David apparently pulled over during what witnesses described as a panic attack, but his truck rolled down an embankment. It took rescue crews several hours to find him. Sarah approached David's bedside carefully, with Buddy held securely in her arms. The moment they were within a few feet of the hospital bed, Buddy began to whimper softly, not the desperate crying they had heard by the highway, but the gentle, questioning sounds of a dog trying to wake a sleeping friend. David's response was immediate and dramatic. His eyes fluttered open, and despite his obvious disorientation from medication and injury, his focus immediately went to the sound of Buddy's voice. "Buddy?" David's voice was weak and rough from intubation, but the hope in it was unmistakable. Is my boy okay?" Sarah carefully placed Buddy on the hospital bed beside David, and the reunion that followed brought tears to everyone in the room. Despite his injuries, David's hands immediately went to Buddy's familiar fur, and the puppy settled against his side with the practiced ease of a trained service animal. "I told him to wait for you," David whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "I told him to wait for the blue car because that's what you drive when you come to get us from training. I was so scared he wouldn't understand, that he'd try to follow me and get hurt." Dr. Martinez was amazed by the immediate change in David's vital signs. His heart rate stabilized, his breathing became more regular, and for the first time since his admission, he seemed calm and oriented. "This is remarkable," she told Sarah quietly. "We've been struggling to manage his PTSD symptoms with medication, but having his service dog here has accomplished more in 5 minutes than we've achieved in 3 days." But even as the reunion provided immediate medical benefits, new challenges emerged. David's injuries would require weeks of recovery, and the hospital's policies about long-term animal presence were unclear. More importantly, David's financial situation as a disabled veteran meant that ongoing medical care and housing for both him and Buddy were uncertain. Sarah realized that saving Buddy from the highway had been only the first step in a much more complex mission to keep this veteran and his service dog together during the most challenging period of both their lives. Word of Buddy's highway vigil and the dramatic hospital reunion spread quickly through the Napa Valley community, largely due to a social media post that Dr. Rodriguez had shared with permission from David. The story of a service dog puppy waiting loyally for his injured veteran touched hearts throughout Northern California and beyond. The first person to respond was Maria Santos, a volunteer coordinator for the local Veterans Affairs office. She arrived at the hospital the morning after the reunion with information about programs that could help David navigate his recovery while keeping Buddy by his side. David qualifies for several veteran support programs, Maria explained as she met with Sarah, Dr. Martinez, and hospital administration. The VA has specific provisions for service animals, and there are nonprofit organizations that specialize in helping veterans with PTSD maintain their service dog partnerships during medical crises. The breakthrough came when Maria contacted Paws for Patriots, a national organization that provided support for veterans and their service animals. The organization's regional coordinator, retired Marine Colonel James Thompson, drove up from San Francisco the same day to assess David's situation. What Buddy did by maintaining his post on the highway demonstrates exactly the kind of loyalty and training that makes service dogs so valuable for PTSD recovery, Colonel Thompson explained. "We can't let bureaucracy or financial constraints break up a partnership that's clearly saving David's life." Colonel Thompson worked with hospital administration to establish a modified visiting schedule that allowed Buddy to spend several hours each day with David while still maintaining medical protocols. More importantly, Paws for Patriots agreed to cover David's medical expenses that weren't covered by VA benefits and to provide temporary housing for both David and Buddy during the recovery period. But perhaps the most unexpected support came from the local community. Sarah's veterinary clinic began receiving calls from people who had seen the social media posts and wanted to help. A retired couple, Robert and Helen Martinez, offered to foster Buddy when he couldn't be at the hospital. A local dog training facility volunteered to continue Buddy's service dog education free of charge. Most remarkably, people began sharing their own stories about encounters with David and Buddy. It turned out that the veteran and his puppy had been living in various temporary campsites throughout Napa County for several weeks before the accident, and many community members had interacted with them without understanding their situation. "They came into my restaurant about a week before the accident," said Linda Chin, owner of a local diner. "David was so polite and that puppy was so well behaved. I gave them some leftover food, but I wish I had known they needed more help." Sarah began coordinating these community offers of support, creating a network that could provide both immediate assistance and long-term stability for David and Buddy. Her veterinary clinic became an unofficial headquarters for the support effort, with volunteers dropping off donations and coordinating visits. The media attention also brought unexpected help from professional sources. Dr. Angela Torres, a psychiatrist who specialized in PTSD treatment and animal-assisted therapy, drove from UC Davis to evaluate David's condition and Buddy's training progress. "The bond between David and Buddy is textbook perfect for service dog relationships," Dr. Torres observed after spending several hours with them at the hospital. Buddy's behavior on the highway wasn't just loyalty, it was trained response behavior that shows exceptional promise for his development as a psychiatric service dog. Dr. Torres recommended that David's recovery plan include formal service dog training sessions that could take place at the hospital, turning his medical recovery into an opportunity to strengthen his partnership with Buddy. The hospital agreed to pilot the program, recognizing that David's rapid improvement with Buddy present had implications for other veterans in their care. 3 weeks after the accident, David was strong enough to be discharged from the hospital. Thanks to the community support network that had formed around his story, he had a temporary apartment provided by a local veterans housing program, ongoing medical care coordinated through the VA, and a schedule of service dog training that would help both him and Buddy prepare for independent living. But perhaps most importantly, David had learned that his determination to protect Buddy during his moment of crisis had created connections and support that neither of them would have found alone. The young veteran who had felt isolated and overwhelmed by his PTSD now had a community that understood his struggles and was committed to helping him succeed. "Buddy saved my life by staying where I told him to stay," David told Sarah on the day of his hospital discharge. "But you saved both our lives by stopping your car and caring enough to help." As they prepared for the next phase of their journey together, both David and Buddy had grown stronger, not just physically but in their understanding of how powerful the bonds of loyalty and community support could be. 6 months after the highway incident, David and Buddy's transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. What began as an emergency rescue had evolved into a model program for veteran and service dog partnerships that was being studied by organizations across the country. David's apartment had become a showcase for how proper support could help a veteran with PTSD thrive. The walls were covered with certificates from Buddy's training milestones, photos from community events, and letters from other veterans who had been inspired by their story. Most importantly, David had enrolled in college courses through the VA's education program and was studying to become a veterinary technician. Inspired by Sarah's example of how medical knowledge could help animals, Buddy, now 10 months old, had grown into a magnificent German Shepherd whose intelligence and training impressed even experienced service dog instructors. His highway vigil had demonstrated natural abilities that professional trainers worked for months to develop in other dogs. His bond with David was so strong that he could detect the onset of PTSD episodes before David was even aware of them himself. Buddy's alert responses are some of the most sophisticated I've seen in a dog his age, explained Jennifer Walsh, the head trainer at the Napa Valley Service Dog Academy where Buddy continued his education. He's learned to interrupt nightmares, provide deep pressure therapy during anxiety attacks, and even guide David out of crowded spaces when he becomes overwhelmed. The success of David and Buddy's partnership had attracted attention from Dr. Angela Torres, who had been documenting their progress as part of a research study on animal-assisted therapy for combat veterans. Her preliminary findings showed that veterans with strong service dog bonds recovered from PTSD episodes significantly faster than those receiving traditional therapy alone. David's case is particularly significant because we can trace his improvement directly to the moment Buddy was returned to him, Dr. Torres explained. The data shows that his anxiety levels, sleep patterns, and social engagement all improved dramatically once their partnership was restored. The community support network that had formed around their story had evolved into something larger and more permanent. Sarah had partnered with Colonel Thompson from Paws for Patriots to establish the Buddy Foundation, a nonprofit organization specifically designed to help veterans and their service dogs during medical emergencies or housing crises. We realized that David and Buddy's situation wasn't unique, Sarah explained during a presentation to the Napa County Board of Supervisors. There are veterans throughout California who struggle to maintain their service dog partnerships when they face financial hardship, medical emergencies, or housing discrimination. The Buddy Foundation had already helped 12 other veteran and service dog teams, providing emergency veterinary care, temporary housing, and legal advocacy when landlords tried to refuse service animals. The organization's success had attracted funding from major foundations and had been featured in national media as an innovative approach to veteran support. David had become an unofficial spokesperson for the program, sharing his story at VA hospitals and veteran organizations throughout Northern California. His public speaking had started as part of his own therapy. Dr. Torres had suggested that sharing his experience might help process his trauma. But it had evolved into a mission to help other veterans understand the value of service dog partnerships. Before the accident, I was ashamed of needing help, David told an audience of veterans at the San Francisco VA Medical Center. I thought asking for support meant I was weak. But Buddy taught me that accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you part of a pack, and packs take care of each other. The presentation included a demonstration of Buddy's abilities, and the response from veterans in the audience was overwhelming. Many approached David afterward to ask about getting their own service dogs, while others shared stories of struggles with PTSD that they had never told anyone before. Sarah, who attended most of David's presentations, was continually amazed by how far both of them had come from that night on Highway 29. David's confidence had grown with each successful speaking engagement, while Buddy's calm presence helped create an atmosphere where veterans felt safe sharing their experiences. The partnership had also changed Sarah's own career trajectory. Inspired by the impact that proper veterinary care had on service dog training, she had completed additional certification in behavioral medicine and was now working part-time with the Service Dog Academy while maintaining her regular practice. David and Buddy showed me that veterinary medicine isn't just about treating sick animals, Sarah reflected. Sometimes it's about understanding the relationships between animals and humans that are essential for both their health and happiness. As their first anniversary of meeting approached, David and Buddy had not only recovered from their individual traumas but had created a legacy that was helping veterans and service dogs throughout the region. Their story had proven that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from overcoming challenges alone, but from building connections that make everyone stronger. 1 year after Buddy's highway vigil, David and Sarah stood together at the dedication ceremony for the Buddy Memorial Highway Rest Area, a new facility designed specifically to provide safe spaces for veterans traveling with service animals. The rest area, built at the exact location where Sarah had first heard Buddy's cries, had become a symbol of how community response could transform crisis into lasting positive change. The rest area featured covered picnic tables, fresh water stations for both humans and animals, and informational displays about service dog partnerships and veteran support resources. Most importantly, it included a bronze plaque that read, "Dedicated to all the silent voices that call for help, and to those who choose to listen." Governor Patricia Wilson, who had driven from Sacramento to attend the dedication, spoke about how David and Buddy's story had influenced state policy regarding service animals and veteran support. "This story reminds us that heroism isn't always about grand gestures," she said. "Sometimes it's about a puppy who refuses to give up, a driver who stops to help, and a community that chooses to care." David, now 29 and thriving in his veterinary technician studies, addressed the crowd of over 200 people who had gathered for the ceremony. Buddy, now a fully certified psychiatric service dog, sat calmly beside him, providing the emotional support that allowed David to speak confidently to large groups. "A year ago, I thought my life was over," David said, his voice steady and strong. "I was so overwhelmed by my PTSD that I couldn't see any future for myself or Buddy. But this community taught me that asking for help isn't giving up. It's the first step toward healing." The Buddy Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, now operating in 6 states and having helped over 150 veteran and service dog partnerships. Sarah had taken a leave of absence from her veterinary practice to serve as the foundation's executive director, coordinating with VA hospitals, service dog training programs, and community organizations to create support networks for veterans in crisis. What we learned from David and Buddy is that veterans and their service dogs face unique challenges that traditional support systems weren't designed to handle, Sarah explained to a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. "When you separate a veteran from their service dog during a medical emergency, you're not just separating a person from their pet, you're removing a critical medical intervention." The Foundation's most successful program was the Emergency Response Network, which provided immediate assistance when veterans and their service dogs faced housing, medical, or financial crises. Volunteers throughout California were trained to provide temporary care for service dogs when their handlers were hospitalized, ensuring that the partnerships could continue without interruption. Dr. Angela Torres had completed her research study using David and Buddy's case as a primary example, and her findings had been published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress with significant implications for how the VA approached service dog programs. The study showed that veterans who maintained strong service dog partnerships during medical crises had 60% faster recovery times and significantly lower rates of depression and anxiety. David and Buddy's case has changed how we understand the medical necessity of service dog partnerships, Dr. Torres explained. We now know that separating veterans from their service dogs can actually worsen PTSD symptoms and delay recovery from other medical conditions. The training program at Napa Valley Service Dog Academy had expanded to include a buddy protocol, specialized training that taught service dogs to maintain vigils and follow complex instructions during emergencies. The protocol was being adopted by service dog training programs nationwide, improving the reliability of assistance animals in crisis situations. Buddy himself had become something of a celebrity in the service dog community. His remarkable intelligence and his story of loyalty had made him a poster dog for the capabilities of well-trained service animals. He regularly participated in demonstrations for new veteran clients, showing them what was possible when humans and dogs worked together as partners. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of their success was the community that had formed around veterans and their service dogs in Napa County. Monthly gatherings brought together veteran families, volunteers, and community supporters for training sessions, social activities, and mutual support that extended far beyond any formal program. We've created something that didn't exist before, reflected Maria Santos, the VA volunteer coordinator who had been among the first to respond to David's story. We've built a community where veterans know they don't have to face their challenges alone, and where service dogs are recognized as the medical partners they really are. As the dedication ceremony concluded, David and Buddy walked together to the bronze plaque, where David placed a wreath in honor of all the veterans and service animals who had struggled without the support they needed. Buddy sat beside the memorial, alert and dignified, his presence a living reminder that loyalty, determination, and community compassion could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. The highway where Buddy had once cried desperately for help had become a place of hope, healing, and recognition that sometimes the most important voices are the ones that others might choose to ignore. But when someone stops to listen, remarkable transformations become possible. If this story of unwavering loyalty, community compassion, and the healing power of human-animal bonds has touched your heart, remember that every day veterans and their service animals face challenges that could be overcome with understanding and support. Their partnerships represent more than companionship. They are life-saving medical interventions that deserve our respect and protection. Subscribe to our channel to discover more stories of animals whose extraordinary dedication reminds us of the profound connections that can heal trauma and restore hope. Like this video if David and Buddy's journey inspired you, and share it with someone who believes that every call for help deserves an answer. Together, we can ensure that no veteran or service animal faces their struggles alone, and that communities everywhere learn to recognize and respond to the voices that need our help the most.